Alrighty. Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Really nice to be here with you, and thanks for joining this webinar today. I'm, like Santina said, I'm the librarian at the Carnegie Mellon University Libraries. Here I serve as a social sciences librarian, but also very involved with the Campbell Collaboration, both as an information specialist for the Methods Coordinating Group, and also as a co-convener for the Information Retrieval Methods Group. And in that role, I've led this assessment of Campbell Collaboration Systematic Review Search, Conduct, and Reporting with a really wonderful team of collaborators that are listed here on this slide. And I'm here to present our findings. We have been working on this for the past couple of years, are getting ready to submit the final publication. So you should see this in publication, hopefully sometime early next year, where there will be many more results than what I have time to present today. But I just wanted to present some of the highlights from our work in today's webinar. Happy to take any questions you have, probably at the end of the presentation, but feel free to add questions to the Zoom chat as I go along, and I will tackle those at the end. So first, just wanted to sort of revisit some of the existing standards and guidelines for systematic review conduct, with a particular focus on search methods and reporting. Campbell reviews are generally expected to adhere to either the Messier, which is the Campbell Collaboration Reporting and Conduct Standards, or PRISMA standards. So for the methodological expectations of Campbell Collaboration and Intervention Reviews conduct standards, some of the searching requirements, mandatory standards that are covered in that document include these that you see on the slide here. So there's an expectation that authors will refer to the Searching for Studies guidance document, which I'll refer to a few times throughout this presentation. Certainly the expectation is that folks are searching the gray literature for Campbell reviews, and conducting various forms of supplementary searching like backward citation searching, as well as searching the references of related reviews. Also, the expectation would be that any use of limits or filters is justified in the manuscript. And of course, that the search is documented in detail and uses appropriate controlled vocabulary and database syntax and keywords for the topic. So a lot of details are sort of laid out in these guidelines when it comes to the search, but in the hope that I think this provides some guidance for authors as they proceed into a Campbell review. There's also the reporting standards. So there's two different Campbell standards, the conduct standards and the reporting standards. When it comes to reporting of these search strategies and methods, the expectation is that authors are listing all of their sources, both databases and gray literature, that the database list includes platform names as well as coverage dates for databases searched, and that the gray literature list includes URLs for any websites that were searched. Exact search strategies for all of these sources should be included in the final published review, and the date of the last search needs to be made clear. That is in part to make it clear to a reader how up-to-date that review is. It's also important, again, when it comes to the supplementary searching, that it's reported whether or not individuals or experts or organizations were contacted, and whether the reference lists of included studies were searched. This is just a sample of some of the mandatory reporting standards for Campbell. I will say that these standards, I think, have recently been updated. And so there's a new document, but these are the documents that we worked with for the purposes of this assessment. Prisma, as you may know, is a little bit more sort of succinct around the requirements for searching. Simply states that all sources must be listed. The date when the source was last searched needs to be made clear, and the full search strategies for those sources need to be documented and reported as well. You may know that there is an extension to Prisma that is specific to searches. This was something published in 2021 by Ruthlifson et al. And this goes into much more detail about sort of transparent and reproducible reporting for searches and systematic reviews, including information about the sources, search strategies, but also whether or not peer review was conducted and information management aspects of the search as well. This is just, I just wanted to sort of note that this document exists. We didn't actually apply these items in our assessment to our assessment of sort of whether or not Campbell reviews are meeting these standards, but this is a really important document, I think, for authors to be aware of, and a really excellent sort of reference for folks to prepare for a very well-documented, transparent, and reproducible search. So in addition to the standards of reporting and conduct, there's also a lot of guidance documents available. Certainly the Cochrane Handbook is a key guidance document that can be applied to reviews outside of medicine and health, and in fact very much informed the guidance document that we refer to in Campbell, which is Kugley et al., published in 2017. And I will note that this document is currently being updated in a project led by Heather McDonald. I'll speak a bit more about that later in the presentation. So sort of looking back at previous work on the quality of search conduct and reporting, despite all of these standards and guidelines, unfortunately, we know that systematic reviews in the published literature are far from, meeting expectations. And there's been a lot of work to look at this in various disciplines, but I'll just highlight a few studies that specifically focused on search reporting and conduct in systematic reviews. So we've had, certainly a lot of work done on reviews outside of Cochrane and Campbell. This work in 2019 looked at 137 systematic reviews published in Medline, I think since 2018, sort of in the last year as of the date of this work. And looked at reported search strategies and found that 90% had errors, with almost 80% of those errors affecting recall. So quite significant problems in sort of the general systematic review literature. Certainly the literature from Cochrane and Campbell fare much better. These are meant to be sort of gold standards of systematic reviews. But even in Cochrane, we find that there are some problems with searches that might limit sensitivity and precision. The study by Franco et al. In 2018 looked at 70 Cochrane reviews and found that a little over half of the searches had some problems that might impact the sensitivity and precision of those results. But generally speaking, most reviews did comply with Cochrane reporting standards. As far as Campbell goes, there has been some work to look at certainly reporting and a little bit, so in 2021, Wong et al. Looked at, did a methodological assessment of Campbell reviews, looking at reporting and methodological characteristics of those reviews published since 2011. And they did find, while this was sort of a broad look at all aspects of the review, they did look a little bit into the search reporting and found some evidence of incomplete reporting. More recently, Ramirez et al. Looked at adherence to published protocols. So the published reviews and their adherence to the original protocol, specifically for Campbell's education coordinating group. And they found overall generally good adherence between the final published review and the protocol. And interestingly, they also found that this improved with the involvement of an information specialist. And this is going to be something I'll talk a bit more about as we move through the presentation. But this is really what's sort of been done with Campbell reviews so far. And so what we really wanted to do was take a deeper dive into specifically the search, reporting, and methods of Campbell reviews. So our objectives with this work were to examine how searches are currently conducted. So we just sort of wanted to get a sense of current methods being used in Campbell. And certainly to look at how searches and search methods and reporting adhere to the standards, specifically Messier and Prisma. We were also interested to see if any sort of novel methods, specifically machine learning or maybe automation methods, were being used in specifically the search aspects of the reviews. And finally, we also were interested in the role of information specialists, right? So everyone on this team is an information specialist. Many of us are information specialists for some of the Campbell coordinating groups. And we're really interested to understand the role that information specialists are playing in these reviews and potentially maybe impact that this might have on the quality of reporting and conduct. So we looked at 86 Campbell reviews. We basically looked at all the reviews, systematic reviews published since 2017. And we did this mainly because we're looking really at a sort of current snapshot of methods and reporting. We weren't necessarily interested in a longitudinal view over time, but really trying to understand current practices. And so we gathered up all of the systematic reviews published since 2017. We excluded anything that was not a systematic review. So you may know that Campbell is publishing some evidence and gap maps, for example. Those were excluded. Also, any reviews that were updates to previously published reviews that did not update the search strategies, those were also excluded. And there were a handful of reviews that relied on sort of search strategies conducted by folks who are not on the author team. For example, reviews that were relying on the global policing database, which has a sort of their own process for gathering and searching for studies. Those reviews we also excluded from this work. So we're really interested in looking at search strategies and reporting that were original to the published review. We had 2 independent reviewers extract data on almost 80 items related to search methods, reporting, and conduct, and any conflicts in that extraction were resolved by a 3rd reviewer. So I'm going to go through a lot of the results. Again, this is not all of the results, and hopefully you'll have a chance next year to look at the paper and see sort of the full scope of what we found in this work. But I'm going to work through a few results related first to just the overall study characteristics, a little bit about source selection and reporting, search conduct and reporting, supplementary searches, again, the role of information specialist. And we also looked at sort of the timeliness of searches, so time lag between the most recent search and the publication date. So overall, you can see sort of a nice spread of reviews spanning from 2017 to 2022. So we had a fairly good representation across these years in our data set. The coordinating groups of Campbell include a number of different groups, and we sort of wanted to look at potential differences across these groups. So we have most of our reviews in this work came from the Coordinating Group for International Development, Education and Social Welfare, and Crime and Justice, with a handful from the Disability Coordinating Group, Knowledge Translation and Implementation, and Methods. We also looked at the geographic focus of these reviews. Most of the reviews had a sort of a global focus with no specific region in mind. A good portion also focused on low and middle income countries, and a handful had more specific regional focus. So in terms of source selection and reporting, we were interested in understanding kind of the breadth of source selection. So it's certainly expected in these reviews that reviewers are searching at least 2 relevant databases for the topic. We also wanted to assess whether or not gray literature was being searched. This is a mandatory standard for Campbell reviews. And we were interested in how their sources were being reported. So again, our database names being reported clearly, but also sub-databases. By that, I mean, for example, we often see folks reporting that they searched Web of Science, when in fact, Web of Science is actually an overarching umbrella database for a collection of databases that may differ across institutions. So it's really important for reviewers to report specifically all of the databases in their collections that they were searching. Also important to know platforms. So again, often someone might report that they searched PsycInfo, but PsycInfo can be offered in the EBSCO platform or ProQuest or Ovid. And depending on which platform was searched, they're going to have very different implications for the way the search strategy would be constructed in terms of syntax. So platforms are an important part of source reporting as well. And again, I noted one of the mandatory items in Messier standards is that URLs for any website searched are reported. So we're interested in looking at that as well. So in terms of source selection, we found that almost all reviews did search at least 2 relevant databases. The reviews also all searched gray literature, and most reviews did provide a list of all of the sources of gray literature. However, there were some that did not provide a full list of sources. Exactly half of the reviews were searched Google Scholar. So we were, again, interested in sort of just what the practices are around searching, and found that Google Scholar is searched frequently, but no other free multidisciplinary scholarly databases like Lens or Dimensions, for example, were mentioned in any of the reviews. And about 1/3 of the reviews reported searching Google, but again, no other free search engines were mentioned. In terms of sort of adhering to these expectations around source reporting, you can see here that most reviews reported at least some representation of the databases that were searched. The partial element here is probably related to not reporting the sub-databases. But at least all of the reviews reported a list of databases that were searched. Database platforms were very often reported, but not in all cases. Database date ranges, which is a mandatory reporting standard for Campbell, was often not reported. And this is not completely surprising as an information specialist. So date ranges for databases, refer to the coverage dates for the database, not in relation to any limits that were applied for the review. And so this is just often goes unreported in these reviews. Gray literature sources were very commonly listed in full, but on the other hand, website URLs were often unreported, despite this being a mandatory standard. Okay, so for search conduct and reporting, so we did not do a full assessment of our peer review of the searches. That would have been unfeasible, but we did sort of do an overall view of whether or not basic elements of searches were present. So for example, syntax, Boolean operators, phrase searching, whether that was sort of in general correctly used. We were also looking at completeness of search reporting. So all of the exact databases need to be reported in reviews. And ideally, all gray literature searches should be provided as well. So we were interested in looking at that. And then in terms of alignment with reporting standards, we were interested to see if dates of searches were given and if limits were justified. And these are just sort of an example of some of the things that we looked at. Again, there's a lot more data in the final manuscript. So for search strategy reporting, we did find that in many cases, the database searches were well reported. However, there were some reviews that were not complete in their reporting of their database search strategies. Exact dates of all searches were often reported, and in this case, the partial probably refers to sort of general dates rather than exact dates. But there were certainly a handful of reviews that did not report the date of the searches. As you can see, and again, not surprisingly, gray literature search strategies were definitely lacking in a lot of reviews. There's a lot of challenges related to searching the gray literature and also documenting those searches. And so it's not entirely surprising that gray literature search strategies were underreported in a lot of these reviews. As far as sort of conduct and this sort of overview of sort of search quality, generally speaking, the use of keyword variations was adequate. The use of Boolean operators and phrase searching and stemmings was adequate in most reviews. On the other hand, we did find that only a little over half of the reviews used the controlled vocabularies or subject headings of databases with that feature. So that's a bit concerning. Controlled vocabulary can be a really powerful way to ensure that that the results of a search are comprehensive. So this is a potentially, an issue that we need to look at in more detail. And about 20% of the reviews we found provided no justification for the use of date or language limits and filters. And so again, this is something that really needs to be addressed, as this is a mandatory reporting standard. All right, so for supplementary searching, again, this sort of refers to things like citation tracing, contacting experts, but also hand searching of tables of contents of relevant journals, for example. So these are some of the things that we looked at in terms of supplementary searching methods. And we found that almost all of the reviews did some backward citation chasing. Experts were contacted in most reviews, and the references of related reviews were screened in most reviews. Hand searching was conducted in less than half of the reviews. And then forward citation chasing, which is looking at the records that are citing the included studies, was actually not conducted in a large portion of the reviews. Forward citation chasing is not a required step in these Campbell reviews, but it can be a really effective way to get at more recent studies, for a particular review, and hopefully also potentially make it slightly more up to date. So the role of information specialists, like I mentioned, is something that we were interested in looking at. We were sort of interested in understanding how information specialist involvement is being acknowledged in reviews, to what degree are information specialists serving as co-authors, and then also whether or not there was any correlation between the involvement of information specialists and these various conduct and reporting aspects of the searches. So we found that a fair number of reviews do not have any indication that an information specialist is involved. And you can see here that well over half have some level of involvement of an information specialist, be it at a co-author level or as a consultant. And these next two charts may be a little tricky to read. There's a lot of information here, but the sort of overall gist of this is that, as you can see, as you move from reviews that had no information specialist involvement to those with a co-author, there does seem to be, in general, a trend toward better conduct of searches around these different aspects of searching. This is most dramatic in terms of, interestingly, whether or not Google was searched, whether or not the search was updated at some point during the review process, and whether or not database subheadings, subject headings were used, which, again, that's perhaps not surprising. I think the use of controlled vocabulary is something that information specialists are well familiar with, and so that is, perhaps not surprising. In terms of reporting standards, we see kind of similar trends with the role with an IS involved as a co-author tending to increase adherence to various reporting expectations. So, this is most dramatic in this case with URLs for gray literature websites that were searched. We also see an increase with the reporting of database names appropriately, as well as forward citation searching being conducted. So some interesting trends there. It's hard to know, to what degree this is directly influenced by the involvement of an information specialist, but something to consider moving forward in terms of how information specialists are involved in these reviews. And sort of as a last highlight, I wanted to note some work that we did to look at the timeliness of the search. So looking at the time lag between the most recent search date and the publication date of the review. So as you know, as the peer review process can be quite lengthy, and so oftentimes by the time a review is published, a search may be, already a bit out of date. And this is, particularly true for fields or topics where the literature is rapidly changing or increasing. So it's important that through the process of a review, the search is updated at some point. And you can see that there's actually quite a time lag in a lot of reviews in Campbell. So we have basically a median, I believe it was, of about 21 months. I meant to put that on the slide, between the time of the most recent search and the publication date. So we're talking about approaching 2 years by the time the review is published. And we also looked at this, differences across coordinating groups, since sort of workflows and peer review processes may affect this. But we actually found no statistical difference between these coordinating groups around time lag. But you can see, there's definitely some concerning points here where we have some, outliers that are quite delayed between search and publication date. So this is something that, again, we can address in different ways, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Oops. Okay, so just some key takeaways from this work. The majority of Campbell reviews really do report sources searched and their full search strategies. Almost all of the reviews are searching gray literature and do conduct at least some supplementary searching, like citation tracing. However, we did find that many reviews do fall short of fully meeting these Messier or Prisma reporting standards. We find that with an information specialist co-author specifically, these reviews do appear to do better on most conduct and reporting items. We also found, I didn't report this in the slides, but I mentioned that the Campbell Collaboration does have a guidance document. The expectation is that authors are consulting that guidance document, and yet we found that that document was rarely cited. I think it was only cited in 7 of the 86 reviews that we looked at. So this is a search guidance document in particular that appears to be underutilized. And then we found these long time lags between the most recent search date and the publication. So this could potentially lead to outdated reviews. So in terms of the implications for this work, I think there's a lot that we can take away here to help us improve processes and guidance and training to help sort of get closer to meeting the standards that we expect from Campbell Collaboration reviews. So the Campbell Collaboration guidance document, like I said, for searching is currently being updated. The hope is that in publishing this work, we can really think about ways that we can better ensure that authors are aware of this document, are using this document, and sort of do that perhaps in this process of title registration, and in the sort of support aspects of supporting authors through the protocol development. So I think this is something that we can certainly look at that could go a long way in helping folks do better with their searching. Peer review processes are certainly also something to consider. We certainly want to make sure that peer review of the searches is happening prior to the searches being run. We found that I think almost none of the reviews we looked at reported anything about peer review. Of course, all of these reviews do go through peer review in the normal Campbell review peer review process. But there certainly are scenarios where some of these reviews are funded by organizations that are expecting a fast turnaround time. And I think there's some pressures for folks to run searches prior, while they're sort of waiting for the protocol to be peer reviewed, which means that, any feedback coming to the authors through this peer review process may not really get incorporated into the search because those searches have already been conducted. So this is a concern, and I think there are things that we can think about in terms of the peer review process, or thinking about, potentially peer reviewing search strategies prior to the full protocol review, just, to sort of expedite that process. But I think that's an important thing that we need to look at. Peer review can certainly make, and I think there's been research to show that peer review can really make a difference in the quality of search strategies. With all of these standards and with sort of increasing understanding of what it takes to develop and report a reproducible, high quality search, I think there are tools that we can provide, perhaps checklists or other peer review documentation upfront to authors prior to protocol submission. I think there's some low-hanging fruit here. For example, reporting website URLs. That shouldn't be a difficult task. It's just a matter of understanding, that this is something that needs to be reported in these reviews, and documenting those URLs, as those searches are conducted. So I think there's some simple things that we can do to support authors in getting closer to full reporting of their searches. And then certainly, again, thinking about workflows in the peer review process that address this time lag issue, and ensuring that searches are updated in closer proximity to the publication date. We can also definitely think about, training and capacity building, and thinking about some of the kind of pain points that we identified in this work, and really focusing on where we can support research teams and provide training around these different aspects of search conduct and reporting. You may be familiar with the new Campbell Systematic Reviews and Meta-Analysis online training course. This is something that contains a unit, a very substantial unit on searching. And I think, for authors that may not have access to an information specialist, this is a great opportunity for them to, learn some skills around searching, understand the value and importance of involving an information specialist. We can certainly make use of this training course to, again, support author teams. And in terms of involving information specialists, I do think it's critical that an information specialist be involved, ideally as a co-author, but in the very least as a consultant. And I recognize that not all author teams have access to trained information specialists. So this is something that we're looking at, as part of the information retrieval methods group, thinking about how we as a group or as information specialists for coordinating groups can maybe help support reviews in some way, especially for teams that just are not affiliated with institutions or universities that might have folks with these skills. So this is definitely something we can look at and address as well. In terms of future directions, it was interesting to find that no reviews, I believe, reported any kind of automation or use of sort of unusual or novel methods related to the searching. And so there's a lot of interesting work being done now to look at ways that natural language processing and other machine learning can be used to facilitate search and retrieval in systematic reviews. And so thinking about, what are these novel methods? How might they apply in Campbell reviews? How might they help possibly speed up the process, but also maybe enhance reporting and conduct of reviews? So we can definitely sort of think about those methods and potential training for review teams. This is also going to serve as a really nice baseline for any future assessment we do. I think our intention would be to, update this review in a few years from now, hopefully after the implementation of some of these training or workflow initiatives, and really think about how any kind of impact of these kinds of initiatives, how they might have impacted reporting and methods around searching. And then I think a lot of things are, potentially emerging from this work to look at new different areas of research around search methods as well. And with that, I just want to acknowledge again this wonderful author team that I worked with over the past couple of years, who made this possible. And then there were a number of folks involved in the protocol development quite a while ago, but I just want to acknowledge their contributions as well. So many thanks to everyone. And I think with that, I will go ahead and wrap up, and I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah, and again, definitely, hopefully look for the publication and hopefully early next year with a lot more details and information at the work.
Thank you, Sarah. Lots of accolades coming from the group here, so well done. And I guess, as mentioned, the video recording will be posted up on YouTube in a couple of days for anyone who couldn't be here or anybody who wants to go back and revisit some of the great work that Sarah presented today. So, Sarah, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for hosting.